Yeah. Hmm. Oh, that's what I'm looking for. Okay. 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 I'm gonna get rolling. All right. Good day, folks. I'm excited to be with you all today and kind of help prep you for the transition of coming into our community, specifically related to off-campus housing. Okay, my name is Lindsay Mason, and I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the director of a unit that's called Off-Campus Life. Off-Campus Life is the office that helps students with off-campus housing, as well as some other things like learning about what it means to live in our local community. We do some transportation in our community. We also do some basic needs work, so helping students get access to free food, free transportation, and housing assistance. So, and I'll go over many of these things today. You, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. You might get a response from someone named Nancy Rhodes. Nancy is a colleague of mine in Off-Campus Life, but depending on the question, Nancy might also ask it live. So as I go through this, I will take pauses at different times before I change subjects. Okay, so for today's talk, there we go. Okay, so we're going to be talking about like how do you find the off-campus housing? How do you find it? What does it mean to live in our community? And then what are some other events throughout the year that we want you to be aware of so that you can gather resources at other times? Okay, so as you're looking for off-campus housing, the first place we want you to start is Rental Search. Rental Search is an online interactive database where property managers can post up properties for rent. It's also, in that page, you're going to be looking at houses, townhomes, condos, duplexes. You might call things like this flats. So that's where you're going to be looking for places to rent. You will also use Rental Search to look at if you need to find roommates. You can do that on Rental Search. You can also look up if someone is trying to sublet a room for rent. So let me give a little bit of description there. So it's possible that you're moving out here as an individual student and you want to find other students to live with. You could do that in a couple different ways. One, you want to look on the roommate profile page. That's where students are posting that they're looking for roommates. It's possible that they are looking for people that don't have housing yet, and then they want to go out and find housing together. So maybe 2 or 3 of you, 4 of you find each other on the roommate page, and then you as a group go out and search for the housing together. It's also possible that, let's say I had a rental and or I'm living in a rental and I'm living with 2 other students, and maybe we have an empty bedroom in our house that we want to rent out to someone. I might post up a roommate profile saying, I'm looking for another roommate. I already have the house. You can come live in this room, you know? So those are things that you'll find on the roommate profile. If you are looking for roommates, I recommend strongly that you create a roommate profile for yourself so that people can find you and know that you're looking for housing. And then there's another page on there called sublets or rooms for rent. So a sublet would be something like, let's say I'm living in a house and I've got 2 other roommates. Maybe it's a 3-bedroom house and there's 3 of us living there, but I want to move out early because I'm transferring to a different school or I want to move back home, whatever that is, but I'm moving out early. I need to find someone to take over the rent that I'm paying for the bedroom. So fairly similar to what I described on the roommate page, but this one is I'm looking for you to take over, meaning I'm moving out on this date so you could move in, you know, the next day or whatever. So fairly similar, but you'll find situations like that on the sublet page or room for rent page. So again, if you're coming here as an individual student and you want to live with others, look on the roommate page and look on the sublet page. Those two pages are locked down only to people that have CSU e-names and passwords. So as you're looking at roommates or sublets, or if you're posting up a roommate profile, or I mean, maybe you in the future end up posting up that you have someplace to sublet, only the CSU community can gain access to those. So you know that people you're talking to are affiliated with CSU. And I'm going to guess 98% of them are CSU students. And I say that because as staff, we also have access to the system because we have CSU e-names and passwords. But yeah, but know that you're only talking to other CSU folks on those pages. And then the properties for rent page, that's open to the public. That's where you're going to be talking to landlords and property managers that all own all sorts of properties across the city. I strongly recommend that you use this site, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, because every single posting before it goes live is reviewed by a staff member. So the likelihood of a scam coming through this site is incredibly low. We haven't had one it's 2024. We haven't had one in over 6 years. So that it's a well-maintained site in that way. There are other options for finding housing. So on the Off-Campus Life site, we have an apartment complex list and a property management list. The apartment complex list is a compilation of all different types of apartment complexes in our community. It's an Excel spreadsheet. And so if you download that Excel spreadsheet, it will give you different information about the different complexes. For example, it will tell you how far the complex is from campus. It will tell you if they offer furniture, or if you have to bring your own furniture, if they allow pets or animals that are, property managers have to allow emotional support animals or service animals, but this list will tell you if they allow pets that are not designated as ESAs or service animals. It will also give you the rough cost of rent per bedroom. I say rough because there are apartment complexes that change their prices by the day. And so we can't keep up with all of those price changes, but we do update this list once or twice a year. So it gives you a rough ballpark of where those rental prices are. Additionally, this list doesn't tell you what's available at the different complex because it's an Excel spreadsheet. It's static. We can't update it all the time, but it does give you enough information to hopefully narrow down your search so that you can find apartments that are that meet some of your needs. And then, yeah, it'll help you decide what apartments to reach out to find the housing. Additionally, we also have a property management list. This list is a list of companies that rent rental properties that are not large apartment complexes. So if you're interested in renting anything other than an apartment, so maybe you want a house, a condo, a townhome, a duplex, you're going to want to look at the property management list. This list will look different than the apartment complex list because the type of properties that a property management company will work with, they're so vast. We can't list all the information about the different properties, but what we do give you is the link to their website so that you know that when you're clicking on that website that you're looking at a reputable site. The other two reasons that we recommend that you use our apartment complex list and our property management list is because we confirm every year that the companies listed on these two lists do rent to students. It is not common in our community, but it does exist. We have some landlords, and you'll hear me use the terminology landlords or property managers. It's the same thing. We do have some landlords in our community that will not rent to students, and that is legal for them to do that. Being a student is not a federally protected identity. So a landlord can legally say, I will not rent to you because you are a student. Again, not common in our community. A lot of landlords are in our community because CSU is here, meaning we have a very high renter population in town. But we confirm every year that all of the apartments and property management companies on these two lists will rent to students so that you won't run into that issue. Okay, there are other ways to find housing that are not managed by off-campus life. Facebook Marketplace is an incredibly popular area for people to find housing. I think that there are legitimate connections being made on Facebook, and I also see a lot of bots or scams coming through Facebook. So you can look on Facebook Marketplace for rentals for sure. You can also look at Facebook groups. Facebook groups, you could go into Facebook and search for a variety of terms to find these groups. So you could search for Colorado State University roommates, CSU housing, Fort Collins rentals, Fort Collins sublets, CSU off-campus living. I mean, all sorts of stuff. And there's all sorts of these groups that come up. I think some of these groups are very legitimate, and legitimate connections are being made because the group is well managed, that they have a really highly active admin that is reviewing every post before it goes up. So I see a lot of those and I think they're legitimate. But I also see bots and scams coming through because some of these groups are run by these private listing companies, and they want the group to exist because if somebody posts in the group about a rental, that company is going to take it and post it on their site to try to drive traffic to their site. And so they're just not as well maintained or managed. And so I think Facebook is a place that people can find housing, but I caution you. There are also private listings, sites that are reputable by and large, but again, I still caution you. So a lot of people use Zillow or apartments.com or rents.com or redfin.com. I mean, you can Google, Fort Collins rentals, and all sorts of private housing places are going to come up. Whether it's Facebook groups or marketplace or these private listings, I just caution you around scams. So let me talk about scams for a second. It is very difficult to identify. I should say it is usually very difficult to identify a rental scam up front. So let's say, for example, let's say I own a rental and I post my rental on, let's say, Zillow. I put all my information up about the rental. I put up pictures, pricing. Maybe I want people to contact me through Zillow instead of putting up like my direct phone number or something. It would be very easy for a scammer to take all my information off my Zillow posting and make their own Zillow posting. So then you might find the house for rent, but what you won't know is that you're contacting with a scammer about the house, even though the house is legitimately for rent, but you haven't contacted me. You've contacted some scammer. So up front, it's very hard to tell if a rental posting is a scam or not. Now, if you're looking on the property management list and you're clicking on the links that we have provided for you there, we are confirming that those are legitimate links. So you shouldn't be concerned about that. There are some red flags up front. So for example, I'm going to go over average rental prices in our community in a couple of slides, but by and large, you might see a 3-bedroom house that's for rent for, let's say, somewhere between $2,000 and $2,500, let's say, per month for the whole house. So let's say you saw a rental posting on Facebook Marketplace where someone said, oh, I'm renting a 3-bedroom house, $800 total for the whole house. That to me would be a red flag that that's a scam. Nobody is renting a 3-bedroom house in Fort Collins for $800 for the whole house. That would be a cost of 1 bedroom in that house, not the whole unit. So sometimes scammers will put up these very cheap prices to draw people in. That's not real. But again, a lot of scammers will post it up. So then what I recommend you do is that you have most of your conversation with the landlord.
Linz, your audio is cut out, I think, again.
Oh, am I better now?
We still can't hear you.
Try it again.
Can you hear me now?
Not really.
Okay.
Oh, there.
we can
You're
hear
there.
you.
Oh, can I pause for 1 second, Bronwyn? I'm gonna try to see if I can get another, if I can jump on someone else's laptop. I've been having audio issues just in the last 2 days. So I'm nervous this will happen again.
Sure.
Okay, give me 1 moment. Bronwyn, Nancy and I are gonna switch places, so let me stop sharing for a second.
Okay.
I'm just gonna have Nancy jump on my laptop. Okay, 1 moment.
In the meantime, if anyone does have any questions, I would suggest dropping them into the Q&A, and then Lindsay or Nancy can get to them when they have a chance.
Okay. Can see you, can't hear you. You may need to. Oh, yeah, there I can hear you.
Yeah, okay, you're hearing me through here. Okay, it's the time of day where the sun just really gets me. Okay, let me pull my presentation back up. Let's, 1 moment. Ron, I'm so sorry about this.
It's okay. Technology doesn't always work. It's great when it does, though.
Um, okay, got my PowerPoint back up. Just about there, so sorry. Okay, am I seeing what I want you to see?
We're seeing it like before it's in full screen mode.
Oh, This is strange how my, oh, let me see if I can do this now. Okay, that should be good. Yep.
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 Okay. Okay. Woof. Okay, son. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so we were talking about scams and how do you avoid a scam? So if you do find a place that you're interested for rent, I strongly recommend that you have most of your communication with that landlord via email. I recommend that because as you're going through the process of communicating with this landlord, that will allow you, if you wish, you can forward me the email and I'm happy to read through the communication to see if I see any red flags. I hope it's obvious. I cannot guarantee that I will catch every scammer. Their scammers get more and more sophisticated and it becomes more and more difficult. But I can look at some things. So for example, you might be interested in going to look at a property and the property manager might be denying you the opportunity to tour that property. I do know of some landlords out there that don't want to tour the property until after you have applied to live at the property. They want to confirm that you will meet the qualifications to live there. Then they'll tour. That's not as common though. Most property managers want you to tour the property beforehand. So I might be able, if there is a landlord that's denying you the opportunity to tour, I can look at that communication to see why they're denying it and whether I think in my judgment that I think it's a scammer that's denying you because they don't actually have access to the property. Or you might find a property that you really like and then you go to apply for the property and they say, okay, well, the application fee is $500. That would be a red flag for me that something is wrong. An application fee should not be that expensive. Or a very common one in kind of the scamming world across a variety of different types of scams is the property manager will say, okay, you can live in the property. Let's have you sign a lease. And I'm even going to help you buy some furniture for the property. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you a check for $2,000. You can use $1,000 of that money to go buy furniture, and then you can send me the extra 1,000 back, and I'll count that as your first month's rent. That is very common in scams in the US where there's money being sent to you and then you have to send money back to them. That you never want to do that. You never want to have someone send you money that you then have to Venmo them back or something. Never. That you should never have to do that with someone. So I can help you potentially catch scams like that if you can chat with them via email. Again, postings up front are very hard to tell if they're scams or not. They can look very legitimate, but it's once you're communicating with them that I can help you catch red flags. So at the end of this presentation, my email will come back up. And so I encourage you to write that down. And again, reach out to me if you've got some concerns about communication that's happening with a potential landlord. Okay, I'm going to do one more slide and then I'm going to pause. How do I do this? Okay, a common question that we get in our office is, where should I live? Who are the good property managers or who are the bad landlords? And I get it. If I were a student, I'd be asking the same question. What's difficult is because we are a public government institution, meaning I'm a public employee, I cannot persuade or dissuade you away from different private companies. So to work around that, what we have done is created this program, this Good Neighbor program. The Good Neighbor program allows property managers or landlords to agree to abide by a higher ethical standard that's above and beyond their legal requirements. And if they choose to abide by that higher ethical standard of property management, they then have the option to be recognized in this program as a good neighbor. The other thing I like about this program is another comment. Sometimes students come into our office and they're like, my landlord is doing this thing that I really don't like. And they describe, whatever it is. If it's legal, there's basically nothing we can do. We might be able to give some suggestions about how you can negotiate with your landlord or resources to help. But if it's legal, what they're doing, I can't step in any formal way. But let's say you're living at one of these good neighbor properties, and let's say they're doing something that's technically legal, but it's a violation of the standards of the good neighbor program. I then can step in. So I can hold them accountable in a different way, that even if what they're doing is legal, but it's a violation of the program standards, I can tell them, if you continue to do this, I will no longer recognize you as a good neighbor. And understandably so, they want to be recognized as a good neighbor. So as you're looking for housing, if you are looking at apartment complexes, these are some apartment complexes that you could consider starting for your search, because they have agreed to abide, again, by these higher ethical standards. So this could be a place where you start, and see if they meet your needs. Okay, I'm going to pause there. Those are all my resources about finding housing. Nance, have there been any questions that have come in the chat? And if folks have questions right now, we can pause for about 30 seconds to let folks type to see if there are questions that have come up about how to find the housing.
Okay. One just came in and it said on our rental search, what does the per person only mean? I guess I could have answered this. Does it mean the price as per person, or does it actually mean that they don't lease the entire apartment?
Yeah, good question. So let's say it's a 3-bedroom unit, it is very common in our student focused apartment complexes, which is what you're going to see a lot of on rental search, not exclusively. There will be other places on there, but let's say it's a 3-bedroom unit. They will rent the whole unit, but they run the leases by the bedroom. So this is a good time to review this. Okay, there's 2 different types of leases you're going to see out there. One is rent by the room or individual lease. Same thing, rent by the room or individual lease. The other one is called a group lease. Technically, it's group and several liability lease, but we're just going to call it a group lease. So the rent by the room leases. So let's say you're looking at one of these apartments that's on the screen, or we have other apartments that are close to campus that rent to students mostly. Let's say they have a 3-bedroom unit. They are going to do an individual lease for each bedroom. Let me give this. Let's say me, Nancy, and Bronwyn want to all live together. So the 3 of us are going to go look for an apartment together. And let's say we want to live at the Standard, one of our good neighbors here. The Standard, we're going to go look at a 3-bedroom unit, and the Standard is going to say, okay, all 3 of you can live together in this 3-bedroom unit. You're all going to share the kitchen and the living room area, but you're each going to have your own private bedroom and a private bathroom. I shouldn't say most, a lot of apartment complexes, every bedroom has its own private bathroom. It's not true for all, but for many. So me, Bronwyn, and Nancy, we say, yep, this is the unit that we like. We want to live here, and all 3 of us together, but we all sign individual leases. So I sign a lease that says I'm responsible for, let's say the bedroom is $900 a month, and I'm only responsible for that $900 a month. A lot of students like that because they don't have to worry about the finances of their roommates. Because let's say later in the year, I'm having difficulty coming up with my portion of the rent, the $900. I might need to go to the property manager and say, I'm going to be late on rent this month, or I need some help. I need to figure out some options to pay rent. For Nancy and Bronwyn, there's no financial consequence for them. They just continue to pay their $900 a month, and they don't have to worry about the fact that I can't come up with my $900. So that's good in some ways. The downside to this is, let's say this semester continues and I continue to struggle and I decide I need to take a semester away from CSU. I need to go home with family. I need to recoup, whatever. So let's say I want to get out of my lease early. Getting out of a lease early will be very pricey, and I'll talk to you about that in a few slides. But the downside for Bronwyn and Nancy is that the landlord is allowed to put anybody they want in my bedroom that I'm vacating. Bronwyn and Nancy do not have to approve of who's being put in my bedroom because they're not signing a lease together. So that's a downside to rent by the room, that you're not necessarily in control of who you live with. That is different than group leases. So let's say Bronwyn, Nancy, and I want to live together, but we want to go live in a house. So the three of us are going to go look for, say, a 3-bedroom house. We find a house we like, we apply, we meet the qualifications, all the things, and we're signing the lease. That lease is going to be all one lease that all of us are on together. Let's say the rent at that house is $2,400. Between the three of us, we have to decide how we're going to split up the rent. Now, we might just say, okay, $2,400 divided by 3, that's $800 a person, and we each pay $800. But we might negotiate amongst each other. We might be like, well, only one of the bedrooms has a private bathroom, so that person should pay more because the other 2 people have to share a bathroom. Or I've seen roommates negotiate, like sometimes there's a cool basement where it's got like a bedroom, bathroom, and a living room area, and nobody else goes down there. So that roommate essentially gets their own living room. So maybe that roommate pays a little bit more. The landlord isn't going to care how you split up that rent. The landlord only cares that on the 1st of the month or 2nd of the month, whenever your rent is due, that you have the $2,400 to pay. So let's say Bronwyn, Nancy, and I are living together and I'm having difficulty coming up with my portion of the rent. Bronwyn and Nancy can't go to the landlord and say, well, here's our, let's say $1,600, they each pay $800, let's say. Here's our $1,600. Lindsay's having difficulty with her portion. The landlord is going to say, you all have to come up with total, I need the $2,400. I don't care how I get it. I need all $2,400. So there's more financial risk if you're in a group lease. But then let's say later down the semester, same story. I'm struggling. I'm going to take a semester away. I'm going to go live with family for a while, and I leave. Now, the 2 roommates that are left, yeah, you got to figure out the rent. You know, it might be like, okay, I'll continue to pay rent for 1 more month, but then I can't do anything else. Nancy and Bronwyn will have to figure out how to cover that $2,400. We also need to find someone to move in to take over my portion of the rent. The good thing is the landlord can't just put anybody they want in there because the landlord can't force you to sign a lease with just anyone. You have to okay who you're going to be living with. So you're in more control of who you live with because you all have a lease signed together. So there's pros and cons to rent by the room versus group lease. If you are coming here as an individual student, another benefit of the rent by the room, you might look at, let's say, Rams Village, and you're saying, okay, I really like Rams Village, the 4-bedroom setup. I can afford the cost of the bedroom inside a 4-bedroom setup because traditionally the more bedrooms, the cheaper it is per bedroom. That's not true all the time, but most of the time. So you might say, I like the price of each bedroom inside a 4-bedroom, but I don't know 3 other people to live with. Well, you could call Rams Village and just say, I want to be in a 4-bedroom unit. Do you have an available bedroom inside one of those units? And can I just take the 1 bedroom? And they can just place you in there. And so there might already be 3 people living there. It might be empty and 3 people get placed later, but it kind of relieves you of the responsibility of having to find a roommate. You can just go in there and Rams Village will figure out the rest. I think living with strangers has pros and cons. You know, it might not work out. The stranger might be very different than you, and that can happen. But I find that a lot of students like living with friends, and they assume that because they're friends, that they will also be good roommates. But being a good friend is different than being a good roommate, just like it's different than being a good colleague. There's different ways that we need to show up. And so I find that um, roommates that are friends first and then live together, they might be less likely to be clear about their needs because they assume everybody has the same needs because they're all friends, they're all similar. Or they might be less likely to speak up if they're frustrated about something because they're trying to protect the friendship. But if you don't speak up about something and it continues, it's usually just going to get worse and worse. But I find that if students that don't know each other live together, they're more likely to be clear about their needs and expectations of one another, and more likely to speak up if they're frustrated because they're not trying to protect a friendship in it. So I think living with strangers has pros. Okay. Nance, any other questions?
None yet.
Okay. We'll pause again, but I'm going to move on to a couple different subjects. Okay, so a common question we get is, is the rental market really tight? How much does it cost to live there? So I'm going to go over those two slides next. So the state of Colorado collects information for us about vacancy rates. A vacancy rate is measuring of all the rental units that we have in our community, how many of them are open and available for rent at any given time for a new tenant to move in. A lot of economists will argue that 5% is a healthy vacancy rate, meaning that 5% of our rental units are open and vacant for new tenants to move in. 5% they say is a good balance where we don't have an abundance of housing, but it also means that there are options for people, but without an abundance of too much housing. We look at third quarter data because third quarter includes August, which is when many students are starting their leases. I recognize the folks I'm talking to right now, y'all are not coming in August, or most likely not. But that's when most leases start in Fort Collins. And so that's the data that we collect. So we just tipped over 5% in 2023. So I'd like to share this information to say that we have vacant housing in town. We have vacant rentals, but it's 5%. And so you might not be able to find, everything you're looking for in the perfect location at the perfect price. You might need to be a little flexible about what amenities are offered, or what location of town you might be willing to live in. So by some economist standards, we're a healthy housing market here, but it's not like there's this huge amount of vacant rentals and you can just choose anywhere to live. And then here's average cost of apartments. To be clear, this is specifically for apartments. Collecting average rents on houses currently is very difficult in our community, although I think that will change next year because of some new laws that are coming into place for our city, which I won't go into detail to. But these are the average cost of apartments in our community for the whole unit. So like the 3-bed, 2-bath, it's saying it's $2,300. So that's $2,300 for the entire unit. And then if there were 3 people living in there, you would split up the rent accordingly. But maybe you're coming with a family and you do want the whole unit for just your family. You'd be looking at average $2,300. Now, this is apartments across our entire community. So this is right near campus, far from campus, brand new complexes, old apartment complexes. This is just the average overall. I think if you are looking at apartments that are very close to campus, they will be a little above this. Apartments that are very close to campus, not all of them, but generally charge a premium for being close to campus because they know the student population is a big renter population. And so a lot of people are motivated to live very close to campus, understandably so they can walk to campus, bike to campus, bus to campus, that all makes sense. But I just don't want you to be surprised if you see things that are a little bit higher than what you're seeing on the screen here. Yeah, let me go over this and then I'll take another pause. Okay, so you will be looking at mostly apartment complexes or houses. Again, there's some townhomes and duplexes that are kind of a mix between these things, but I want to talk just a little bit about the different considerations of living in an apartment versus a house. So if you're looking at an apartment complex, there's a lot of them around campus and they're easy to find because you can find them on Rental Search, you can find them on our Good Neighbor site. You can also just Google and they're all going to come up because they've got big marketing budgets and they make sure you know about them. A lot of the apartment complexes offer furniture. They know that a lot of students do not have their own furniture, so that's common to find. It's also common for apartment complexes to put the utilities in as a part of the rent. So you might find a bedroom for rent in an apartment that's, let's say, $900 a month. And they'll say, well, it's $900 a month, but everything's included. The rent, the electricity, the internet, the water, all the utilities, all included. You might see some complexes where they say, okay, the rent is $850 a month and everything's included except electricity. So you would need to get the electricity through the city of Fort Collins, and which there's a process you do that in, which is in our handbook, and I'll go over our handbook in a little bit. But you would get the electricity and then you would pay for that utility separately. That does exist, but a lot of apartment complexes try to make it easy for students and it's just all rolled into one payment. Apartment complexes also have a lot of amenities. They have cool pools and gyms and tanning beds and saunas and, you know, just a lot of fancy stuff that a lot of students, some students are excited about. I already talked about rent by the room. Again, there's pros and cons to rent by the room. And then an apartment complex, at least in comparison to a house, has less privacy. You share walls, you share hallways, you know, that it just has less privacy. If you do want to live in a house, you generally have more privacy in a house because you're not sharing walls with your neighbors and you have more space. You most likely have a backyard, front yard, etc. You are also more likely to be able to have pets. Not every house will allow you to have pets, but it is much more common than if you were to rent an apartment complex. Cons, there are higher levels of responsibility. You have more to take care of, and you have more city ordinances that are applicable to you, which I'm going to go over some of those in a little bit. One other con I should put on here that I haven't listed yet, sometimes the houses are just harder to find. So, you know, I might own a rental, and as an individual landlord, if I just have, say, one house that I rent, I don't have a big marketing budget to make sure that my SEO is high so that people find me and online. SEO is search engine optimization. You know, I don't have all this money to do all that. So I can only afford to post in a couple places. So houses are oftentimes really enjoyable for people to live in, but they can be harder to find because there's a lot of mom and pop landlords is what we call them, just like individuals that happen to own this extra house that they rent out. Okay, I'm going to pause. That was a little bit of information about the cost of living in our community and some considerations of apartments versus houses. Nance, are there any questions right now? And again, I'll also just pause for a few seconds in case folks want to ask questions.
There was a follow-up on the previous question about the per person only that was when looking for separate apartments, like me and my wife will be living there, I should typically exclude these per person only lists. Does that sound about right? I responded yes, and also reminded on the rental search you can adjust the pricing to show either per person or the full unit price. So yeah.
That's excellent, Nance. I agree with you, Nance, that in general, the only difference is, I'll put this in there. When they're running individual leases, the property managers are expecting that there's only one person per bedroom. So one of them you might be able to find, you might look at these apartment complexes that run individual leases, and maybe you find a 2-bedroom unit and you and your wife go live in the 2-bedroom unit. Now, you and your wife may plan to share a bedroom, but for the lease purposes, you might be able to go in and technically sign 2 individual leases, and then you just get the whole unit for you and your wife. But let's say you and your wife were looking at a 3-bedroom unit and there were 2 people in 2 of the bedrooms already, and there's only 1 empty bedroom. Yeah, in general, the property manager is not going to allow 2 people to move into that 1 empty bedroom. The expectation is 1 person per bedroom. I will say another exception is studios and 1 bedrooms. Property managers will definitely expect a couple, partners to come in and rent a studio or 1 bedroom. That would be normal. But they might not expect, let's say it's like you and your wife and kids, they might not expect that you and your wife and your kids will come in and rent a studio or 1 bedroom. They may say, no, only 2 people are allowed to be in there. If you have kids with you, you need to get a 2 or 3 bedroom unit. Okay, I'm gonna move on. In preparation for this workshop, I checked in with our lawyers over at Student Legal Services to ask, like, what are some recommendations that you would give specifically for folks that are coming out of the country? Student Legal Services, just so you know, is a group of attorneys that, as long as if you're fully enrolled at CSU and paying student fees, you get to talk to these lawyers for free about anything because you're paying for them through your student fees. And one of the most common areas that they help students with is leases, because it's usually one of the biggest contracts that a student is signing. And it's oftentimes their first time signing a contract like that. So our lawyers do a lot of lease work. Okay, so here are some things that the lawyers recommended that I speak with you about. 1, live tour. So it will be very common now for since COVID, a lot of property managers put online tours up on their website so that you can just click through kind of a video walking through a model apartment. That's fine for looking at like what the layout of the apartment might be, but what you really want to see is the current status of the unit. So what you want to request is a live tour. So ideally the landlord, puts you on a Zoom, FaceTime chat, whatever, and they walk through the property with you live and you're looking at it, through their phone or something. I will say, the lawyers and I agree. We encourage you to request this. It is possible that they will deny you, and that's not like a red flag necessarily. It would be a red flag if a scammer didn't want to show you pictures or anything. That would be a red flag. But if a property manager, they might say, well, we plan to rent you unit 201, let's say inside an apartment complex, but somebody's living there now. So I don't want to go, barge in on them and give you a tour. So that might be reasonable, but you should still, if you should request, can I do a live tour with you on Zoom, on your phone or whatever, you should still ask for it. Renter's insurance. This will be common. Most property managers will require that you have renter's insurance. So let's say I own a rental and so I have a house that I rent in town. I will have an insurance policy on the house. So like if there were a fire or a leak or some type of damage to the physical house, that will be covered by my homeowner's insurance because I own the home. Your renter's insurance will be there for it to cover everything inside the home. So it'll cover your furniture, your belongings, those types of things. Most property managers want you to have renter's insurance because let's say there is a leak and it damages, I don't know, a dining room table of yours or something. If you lived in the house that I rented, I don't want you to come after me for to say, well, you have to replace the dining room table. I'm going to say, you go to your renter's insurance for your items. I'll go to my homeowner's insurance for the physical house. So that there's some legal protection that landlords want for themselves. So renter's insurance, there's 2 different ways that you can get this. If you have some other type of insurance policy in the US, so let's say, for example, you are planning to come here and have a car, which means you will have auto insurance or car insurance. If you have something like that, you should just work with the company that you're getting the auto insurance through to just add on your renter's insurance. If you do not have some other type of physical insurance, oh, and let me clarify, this is not related to health insurance. Health and medical insurance is very different. I'm talking about insurance policies that cover physical items that you own, like a car. If you do not have any other type of insurance like that, you can just Google renters insurance, and dozens of companies will do renters insurance for you. It's just easiest if you already have like car insurance or something like that to just add this on, but it's not necessary. And renters insurance will be pretty cheap. I'm estimating somewhere between like 20 and 30 bucks a month. So it's pretty minimal how much you're paying in comparison to rent and all those other things. Visitor definition. So depending on the visa that you all have coming over, it's possible that you have someone will have like a visitor visa, or be identified as a visitor by visa standards. That is different language than what landlords will use in their leases, where they will use the term visitor. A landlord can legally say something like, okay, I'll rent you this house, and you can have visitors or people that visit you at the house, but they can only stay for, say, 3 nights. What the landlord is trying to avoid, they don't want to rent you the house and then you have a bunch of other people come live with you that the landlord didn't get to vet or check through. When you apply to live at a house, it will be common that they will want to run a criminal background check. And now, for many people coming over to the US, it might be impossible to get any kind of a background check because you don't have any type of background in the US if it's your first time coming in. And we'll talk about that in a second because that's also related to credit checks. But it'll be common for a landlord to say, okay, I just need to confirm that you don't have any violent history over the last 7 years. That's what they're usually checking for, is violent crimes over the last 7 years. What the landlord doesn't want to have happen is that, let's say you come in, you pass all the checks, you get to rent the house, but then you have other people come live with you, and the landlord didn't get to confirm that they don't have a violent background. So the landlord doesn't want someone living in the house that has some type of crime in their history that they don't allow living in the house with that type of background. So a landlord will commonly say, okay, yeah, you can rent the house and you can have people over at the house. You can have friends stay over, family visit, whatever, but they can only stay for 3 nights. You can't have someone indefinitely stay with you at the house. So I just want to clarify. So in the lease, there will be visitor language that is different than visa visitor language. Leases are immediately legally binding. If you sign a lease and then later change your mind, you cannot just cancel that lease. If you do sign a lease and then later want to live somewhere else, there's going to be 2 different ways for you to get out of that lease, and both of which are pricey. One, this is the less common way, but some landlords still do this. They'll say, okay, you can break the lease, but you owe me 1 or 2 months rent. You have to pay me that fee, because the landlord says it's going to take me 1 or 2 months to find someone to live here again. So they'll say, yep, I'll let you out, but you owe me 1 to 2 months rent. And it'll say it in the lease how much that would be. So that's a lot of money. That's thousands of dollars. Or the more common thing we see today is, yeah, I'll let you out of the lease as soon as you find someone to take over the lease for you. So you're on the hook for the rent until someone takes over your lease for you. If that's the situation that you end up in, you will want to use systems like Rental Search. You'll want to post up that you have a place to sublet or you're looking for someone to take over the lease. So we can help you find folks in that way. The property manager might have a waiting list of folks that are interested in living at the property. So they might have someone that's interested in living there. But landlords cannot block you from finding someone to take over your lease, but they are also not obligated to help you. Let's say I owned an apartment complex. It's got 50 units in it, and I'm renting all 50 units. And let's say you tell me, oh, I want to move out early and I want to find someone to subrent or sublease my place or release my place. I'll say, okay, you can find someone. I'm not going to help you find them, but I can't stop you from it. And then let's say someone comes to visit the apartment complex, they want a tour, they want to find, they're like, oh, I really want to live here. As the property manager, if I have 2 or 3 vacant units, I'm motivated to get someone to live in those vacant units. I'm not motivated to help someone to find you a releaser because I'm getting your rent either way. But I've got these 2 or 3 empty units that I'm not collecting rent from. So that's really what I want to fill. So that's just an example of your property manager can't stop you from finding someone to take over the lease, but they're not obligated to help you, and I would not count on them helping you. So if you choose to sign a lease, it's immediately legally binding, and if you change your mind later, it's very pricey to get out of that lease. The lawyers also wanted me to make sure that you knew that there was some language in the lease. You want to read the language in the lease of whether the lease will automatically renew or if you are required to give notice. Neither one of these are bad. You just need to make sure you know which is true for you on your lease. So if they require notice, your landlord might say something like, you have to tell me by February 1st if you plan to live here again and sign a lease again that starts in August. So you're basically giving like a 5 months heads up that you're planning to live there again. If you do not give them notice, the landlord will assume that you are not going to live there again, that you are going to move somewhere else, and they'll start finding someone else to lease your apartment. The other option is an automatic renewal, where the landlord will say, unless I hear from you, I will assume that you want to continue to live here. So I will re-up your lease for you. I will redo it for you. Now, if you do plan to live there another year, great. But let's say you're finishing up at CSU and you plan to move back home and you don't tell your landlord that you plan to move back home, they're going to re-sign that lease for you and then you're on the hook for that rent. So that's neither type of lease is bad, but you just need to know, are you required to give notice? And if so, by when? Or is it automatic? And if you don't want to live there again, when do you need to tell them you don't want to live there so you're not automatically renewed on that lease? I already talked about scams. The last thing I want to talk about on this slide is guarantors. This is where we get a lot of questions from a variety of students, international students included. So leases will oftentimes require you to have a certain credit score and a certain level of income. And then if you don't have that level of income or that credit score, you are required to have a guarantor or a cosigner, same thing. Those are the same thing, just 2 different pieces of language to describe them. But you are required to have a guarantor or a cosigner that does have the income or credit score requirements. Now, if you've never been to the US, you have no history in the US, you aren't going to have a credit score in the US. So you're not going to meet the requirement. You have a few options of how to get around that. One, there are companies out there that specialize in this, that the company is built to serve as guarantors for people that do not have guarantors or cosigners for their leases. And they do this for there'll be a guarantor on a car loan, all sorts of stuff. But there's companies out here that specialize in this. The company, usually what will happen is they'll say, yep, I'll be your guarantor for you, and you owe me 10% of the rent each month. So let's say your rent, for simplicity purposes, is $1,000 a month. You will pay the landlord $1,000, and then you will pay that company $100 to be the guarantor. If you can afford that, that's a fairly easy route to go. And if you're looking at an apartment complex, it will also be common for that apartment complex to have companies like this that they already work with. So you could just ask them, what company do you work with? And that could be easy if you can afford it. Another option is you might say, I don't have a guarantor, but I could pay 3 months rent up front. Now, again, this is assuming that you can afford that up front. but you might say, I'll pay a bunch of money up front to live there. And you're essentially showing the landlord, I am financially secure. I can afford this. So here's 3 months rent up front, for example. But again, that's pricey. Another option is you look for a group lease with at least one other person that does have a guarantor in the US. And then so if you do a group lease, that group lease generally will only require one guarantor. So even if there's 3 or 4 or 5 of you on the lease, only one guarantor has to sign. And that guarantor is saying, yes, I'll sign on for this lease because I've got the income and the credit requirement. So that's helpful if you happen to have family in the US, or if you have friends that are here that have family in the US, someone that's got some type of connection to other people in the US that can be that guarantor for you. Now, as long as you pay your rent every month, then there's no risk to the guarantor. But if you do not pay your rent, what the guarantor essentially is signing on to is they're saying, I will be the financial backer for this lease. Meaning, if the people on the lease do not pay the rent, I will pay the rent. So that's what a guarantor or a cosigner is committing to being for you, is your financial safety net. So as long as you always pay the rent, then they won't feel the impacts. But if you don't pay the rent, let's say you don't pay the rent, and let's say the guarantor is like, shoot, I can't afford to pay the rent either. Technically, the landlord can come after that guarantor in court. They can sue them to get the money. So there's financial consequences if you don't pay the rent. There's financial consequences if you don't pay the rent. But those are options for you to figure out how to get around that. There are some landlords out there that will say, okay, well, let me just see that you're registered for classes at CSU. And as long as I know you're going to school at CSU, I won't require you to have a guarantor. There are landlords that exist out there, but I would not count on finding someone like that. Most of them are going to want the financial safety net that either you prove because you've got a credit score here, or your guarantor or cosigner has the credit score and the income to show that you've got the money to pay for the rent. I realize as I say this out loud now, I think Bronwyn, in future webinars, I'm going to build out an entire slide about guarantors. I think there's enough information now to build that out. Okay, I'm going to pause again. Nance, have any questions come in? And again, I'll also just pause to give time people to ask questions, because this is usually where a lot come in.
No questions in the chat as of right now.
Okay. I'm going to just pause to see if some come in. Okay. Oh, I assume none.
None.
Okay. And if more questions come up, we can certainly back up without a doubt. Okay, I just have a couple more slides to cover. One, we do have some, once you're here, you found the house, found the apartment, whatever it is you're moving in, I also want you to know of a couple rules that we have in town. I'm not going to go over all of these, but some that you should know upon immediately moving into our community. If you're moving here to start in the spring semester in January, that means you're moving here in the winter, and we get snow in Fort Collins. So if you live in a house, you are going to be required to shovel the sidewalk that is adjacent to your house. This will also be true if you live in a duplex, maybe a townhome, basically anything that's not a large apartment complex. But our city requires us to shovel the snow off our sidewalk that is adjacent to our property, so that people can use the sidewalks safely year-round. You have 24 hours to shovel the sidewalk after a snowstorm has come through. If you do not shovel your sidewalk within 24 hours, the city will send someone out to do it for you, and then they will give you the bill. So if you're in a house, you can actually come by Off Campus Life. We give away free snow shovels to help people with this. We can give you a free snow shovel. And then just make sure if it's snowing, you need to get out there and shovel your sidewalk within 24 hours. This is only applicable to the public sidewalk. This is not applicable to like your driveway or your private walkway. It's only applicable to the public area that other people are using. Noise. So a lot of cities in the US have what's called quiet hours. There's certain times of generally of night where the expectation is that the whole city kind of lowers their noise volume. It's fairly common for quiet hours, excuse me, to be in effect from like, say like 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. or 10 p.m. to 8 a.m., something like that. That's fairly common. It's not like that in Fort Collins. In our community, our noise ordinance is in effect 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Our noise ordinance is concerned with what level of noise is reasonable for the time of day, the day of week, the type of noise, and it's even different by neighborhood. So let's say, for example, you're living in a house and you have to mow the lawn because in Fort Collins, you are required to keep your weeds or grass at 6 inches or lower. So we are required to maintain the grass or weeds on our property. Let's say you need to mow your lawn. Mowing a lawn is very loud. That lawnmower, many people are going to hear that lawnmower. But let's say it's Saturday afternoon, 3 p.m. That's a reasonable time to mow your lawn. Let's say you want to mow your lawn and it's Saturday morning, 3 a.m. By US standards, that is not a reasonable time to be that loud. We take our noise very seriously in the city of Fort Collins. A noise ticket can be $1,000 or more and technically can be written to each roommate. So our city really cares about noise. So let's say you move into a house and you want to be social, you want to have some friends over, which, you know, we in off-campus life, we encourage students to be social. That's healthy to be in community with other humans. Let's say it's Friday night and it's 9 p.m. It might be reasonable to be a little loud on Friday night at 9 p.m. because a lot of people the next day don't have work or school. But let's say it's Sunday night at 9 p.m. and you want to be a little loud. That might now be unreasonable because a lot of people on Monday mornings have school or work. I want to share this with you because I know noise, what's a reasonable level of noise is different by country, and also reasonable level of noise at different times of the day or night is also different by country. So this one, it's based on what's reasonable, mostly by US standards. It's also at the discretion of the police officer. So if there is a noise complaint, the officer is going to stand at the edge of your property and listen for how much noise they can hear. And based on how much noise they can hear at the edge of your property, they're going to assume that's how much noise your neighbors can hear, and they're going to determine if it's reasonable. So by most US standards, you know, again, most people would be quieting down about 9 or 10 p.m. and not making a whole lot of noise until sometime between 6 and 8 a.m. in the morning. I want to be clear, our ordinance is not written with those specific times. I'm just trying to give examples of some normal normal US noise standards because our ordinance, because reasonable is so culturally relevant. So I'm trying to define what's reasonable. But again, Friday or Saturday night might be okay to be a little bit louder till, you know, like a little bit past 9, 10 o'clock, but not on a night where the next day is a weekday where a lot of people have school or work the next day. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about here is our occupancy ordinance, or what we called U+2. Our city used to limit how many unrelated people were allowed to live together. We used to only be allowed to have 3 unrelated people live together. So you plus 2 of your friends. That's why it's called U+2. We also were limited on how many families could live together. So a family unit of any kind and any size, as long as they're all related by some way, they all could live together. But you couldn't have 2 families that are not related to one another live together. These were limits in our occupancy ordinance. But that occupancy ordinance went away in July. Our state governor doesn't allow cities to have occupancy ordinances like this anymore. So When it went into effect in July, most students had already signed leases for the next year. So we didn't really see a big impact yet. But this coming leasing cycle, so as you're looking for housing now, or if you're looking for housing in the future, we will no longer have a limit by city law around how many people can live together. Now, a landlord will still be allowed to limit how many humans can live in their property. If I were a landlord and owned a house, I can still legally say, I only want 4 people in there or 5 people in there, and that's it. I can say that. But by city law, there's no limit. So it's also possible, let's say I'm a landlord, let's say I have a 4-bedroom house, I might be like, yeah, let's put 10 people in there because I think that's reasonable. And you might also think that's reasonable. And if you all agree on that, great. What we're encouraging students to think about now is what they find to be reasonable. So as you're looking for housing, you need to consider, is it reasonable? How many people, for your definition of reasonable, can share a bedroom or share a bathroom or share a kitchen? We also want you thinking about, like, what about Wi-Fi? How many people can your Wi-Fi support or internet support? Do all of you have pets or emotional support animals or service animals? And is it good for all of those animals to live together? What about the parking at the property? How many people living there have cars and how many cars can park at that property? There is no right answer here. This is all going to be different based on how you were raised. And I think this is different by culture, including in the US. It's the way even people raised in the US will define reasonableness will be very different. But that's what we're encouraging you to consider, is just what's reasonable. Again, you need to look at the lease because the landlord can limit how many people can live in the house. But if the landlord doesn't have a limit or has a really high limit, then you need to consider what's reasonable for you. Okay, I'm going to pause. Any questions about those rules?
Nothing in the chat so far.
Okay, I'm going to move on. We can come back to this certainly, but just want to I think I've just got 2 more slides. Okay, transportation is a common question that we get. So in the city of Fort Collins, all of our buses are free around town. I encourage you, if you're not going to bring a car, Nancy, could you put this link in the website or in the chat? Can you put the ride transport link? So thank you. Our public city bus system is called Transport. Their website is ridetransport.com. I encourage you to look at all the bus routes, and there's even a map on their website that's called All Routes. You can look at their bus routes so that you can see where the buses go in town. And if you're not going to have a car, it would be helpful if you lived near a bus route. So you can look at the address of the property you're looking at and what bus routes go by it by looking at the Ride Transport app. I have found in my experience traveling to different countries that public transportation systems work differently in different countries. And so know that there are people that work for transport that are specifically employed to teach you how to ride the bus. They, in fact, will even get on the bus with you and teach you how to ride the bus so that you know how to tell the driver you need to stop, you know how to look up what stop you need to go to, all those things. So there's great education to help you learn how to use our buses. But our buses are free, really clean, really safe, highly popular to use. So I recommend for people to use our buses. In addition, we are also a bike-friendly community. And well, bike-friendly is kind of an understatement. We are the highest status of bike-friendly community and campus that you can be, according to this national organization that ranks cities and campuses. So we are very bike-friendly. We have bikers all over town. We have tens of thousands of bike parking spots on campus. And so a lot of students bike. That is a very common way to get around town. A couple of things. We do have a used bike shop on campus that you can buy bikes at. So that's a great option for you to buy a bike. There's one on campus called Recycled Cycles. It's in our student center. If you bring a bike to campus, you do need to register the bike with our police department. It costs $10, and then the registration is good for the life of the bike. The registration just helps because we're so bike friendly and because we have so many bikes around us, bike theft does happen. And so you will want your bike registered with the police department, because if your bike were to get stolen, that your bike is registered to a certain number, and a bunch of shops around town know to look for that registration. So your bike's more likely to get recovered for you. In addition, if you bike, you want a U-lock, a metal U-lock. You do not want a cable lock. A cable lock is easier to use, admittedly, but they're very easy to snap. But a U-lock, in order for someone to get through a U-lock, they have to bring out a grinder. So it's much harder for someone to steal a bike if it's locked up with a U-lock. And then in addition, you will also want to learn about the bike laws. In general, if you're on a bike, in general, you need to follow the same laws as a car. Not true for every situation, but for most. And so you will want to read about the laws to make sure that you understand bike safety. We do have accidents that happen in town that are between cars and bicycles. Sometimes it is the car's fault, and oftentimes it's the biker's fault because the biker like blew through the stop sign or something. That is common. So you just want to read the bike laws, and you want to make sure that you're being safe. And then I just like to let folks know about Ramride. Ramride is your late night free free transportation on Fridays and Saturday nights. So let's say you are out and about Friday and Saturday night in Old Town or at a friend's house or at the movies or wherever. Ramride will take you around town for free. It's just like an Uber, but it's CSU students driving other CSU students around town. It's late night. It's 10 p.m. to 2:30 a.m. So if you're out and about Friday, Saturday night, 10 p.m. to 2:30 a.m., download the Ramride app and we'll get you around town for free. And then I mentioned earlier, we have events throughout the year. The one that I think is most applicable to you right now is our off-campus handbook. We produce a handbook every December that gives a ton of information about living off campus. So earlier I mentioned, like, you might live in an apartment complex that doesn't include the electricity in your bill. So you will have to turn on your own electricity. You do that through Fort Collins Utilities, and you can learn how to do that in our off-campus handbook. There's a ton of other information in our off-campus handbook about other utilities, safety, living in our community, resources in our community, all sorts of stuff. But we produce a new one each December, and then we keep it up year round. And admittedly, most of the information isn't new each year. It's the same information. There's some new information, but not a lot. So you want to look at the handbook on our website. Again, it got produced last December, but most of it is still the same. But that will give you a lot of information to help you prep for coming into our community. Okay, I'm going to put up my email here. As I mentioned earlier in the webinar, if you have concerns about communicating with a landlord that you think might be a scam, email me. I'll look at the email chain for you to see if I think it's a scam. Again, I cannot guarantee that I will catch all scams, but I can help give some context. Like last year, I remember a student emailed me saying, this landlord is renting a 1-bedroom apartment and they're saying it's $1,700 for the 1-bedroom apartment. That feels like a scam. And I was able to tell that student that's actually fairly close to market. That for me was not a red flag. But depending on the country you're moving from, that could seem incredibly expensive. But for us, it's normal. So I was able to say, actually, this doesn't seem unusual to me. But there were international students that emailed me last year where I was looking at the communication. I'm like, yep, I think that's a scam, and telling them to back up. So I'm happy I'll leave this up here so folks can record that. And then I know we have maybe a little under 10 minutes left. Nancy, are there any questions, or Bronwyn, is there anything else you'd want me to talk about that you often hear international students ask?
So there's one question in the chat. Is there any app or website to look for off-campus housing in Fort Collins? Sorry, I joined a bit late. I'll put the rental search link on the link on chat.
Put the rental search, and then a lot of private companies will do apps. So like I know Zillow has an app. So if you want to do it on your phone specifically, but yeah, Nance will drop the rental search in there, which is a website that we run in Off-Campus Life. I'll back up. Here's some other resources that you can look at on our, where is it? on our off-campus life website, you can find an apartment complex list and a property management list that you can look at to find companies. But then outside of that, you're looking at a lot of private areas like ZillowApartments.com, Rent.com, Redfin.com. What I actually recommend you do is you just Google Fort Collins rentals, and all sorts of companies are going to come up that I think those companies are generally reputable, but just be cautious of scams. That's my one caution, because those companies aren't necessarily looking at who's posting on there or approving them. They're just letting stuff go live. Everything that goes on rental search, we review before we let go live. So we won't let something through that we think is a scam, but yeah. Bronwyn,
There
I
is-
saw you. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you go, Nance.
There is one other question. Can I search and book the rental places prior to my arrival to the United States as an international student? Yeah,
Book. I don't know if I understand the question.
I guess actually sign a lease. I would think some property managers, apartment complexes might allow that via, digitally.
Oh, yeah.
I'm guessing
Yeah.
that's the question.
Yeah, if that's the question, like, can I have a lease signed before I move here? That's actually what I hope you have, is you have signed a lease before you move here. If you arrive in the United States and you do not have housing that day, there is very limited options for what we would call emergency housing. You can get a hotel, you can get an Airbnb. There are options like that. They're pricey. You can get that. They're cheap options, very, very limited. I would not want you to rely on those. But if you want to come to the US and say you're going to rent an Airbnb for a month while you look for housing, I think that's a possibility. It's expensive. Most people, I would recommend that you have a place that you've committed to, so that when you move here, you have a place you're going to move in. It would be even more ideal if you happen to already have friends that are at CSU and they can go tour the place for you. That's a great option, to have a friend go look at it in person. Again, you want to request a live tour if not, and then again, you may or may not be able to do that. This is hard for international students, transfer students, graduate students, a ton of students that are moving in from outside the community. They oftentimes can't look at the unit before they actually get here. But again, unless you're planning to get an Airbnb or hotel, that is what you're looking at. Bronwyn, I saw you come off mute and I heard you for a second there. Are we following, or is there anything else you would add for that?
I think that's good. Yeah, you hit the questions that I was going to bring up.
I'm just going to pause for a second in case any other questions do come up.
Somebody is asking about on-campus housing since they missed that session.
That there's a link that we can share out for that. What I would say is, if you have not already applied for on-campus housing, I recommend looking for off-campus housing at this point. It's quite late and it's not very likely that you would get something, but we can share out that information from that session.
Yeah, I think it can be worth applying, but I would not count on-campus housing at all. If you haven't applied, you can apply now and see what they say. On-campus housing folks, but you need to be looking off campus, and yeah, you should not be relying on-campus housing for sure. And that's a question sometimes that I get. On-campus housing, you apply and then you're assigned a room. And depending on the country you're coming from, there might be a lot of housing that works like that too. Sometimes I will get international students that will email me and say, can you help me find a place? It works so differently. It's not like that in the US. So we give you all these resources so that you can look on your own. But I'm not assigning you the house or finding you the house. This is really, this is your individual responsibility to find the off-campus housing using the resources we give you, but you're the one that's searching through them. You're emailing or contacting property managers. You're setting up the tours yourself. It's all individually done, which is different than on-campus housing. On-campus housing, they do a lot for you, but it's off-campus housing. They're all private people doing this. And so I can't do this for you.
So 2 more questions. First one, To ask for the information or apply to the apartment, the landlord or apartment's website will need the phone number. However, I don't have a US phone number. How can I solve it? Do you want to?
Bronwyn?
I mean, I would say that I would use whatever phone you do have access to at the moment. You can indicate that it's international if there's any opportunity to do so. We do also have, and I'll drop an email there. But if you need to have a US phone number, we do have a provider that offers eSIMs that you can set up a phone number from your home country.
Cool.
So I'll put an email in the chat, and if you have questions, you can reach out to us. It's the ISSS office, but you could reach out and let us know that you need to access an eSIM, and we can get you one of those.
Thanks, Bronwyn. Nance, there was another question?
Yes. Is there any specific documentation process required for international students to rent a place?
It is possible that they will ask for a visa. Yes, that is very possible that they'll ask for a visa. I am not an expert in the different visas. Bronwyn, have you talked to other international students about what type of documentation they requested? If it's,
Yeah,
I don't
you're
know all the
generally-
letters, numbers.
Yeah, you're generally going to have your I-20 or your DS 2019. And some may want to see a picture of your visa as well. That's not unusual.
Thank you.
That's it on chat.
Okay, we're at time. My email's here if folks want to reach out to me. Yeah, but and then when you do arrive here, Off Campus Life is here. We're in our student center. We're open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. You do not need an appointment to come meet with us. You can just walk in. And there will be, depending on your question, either my front desk can support you or a full-time staff member will come out to support. But you don't need an appointment. You can just walk in and visit us. But welcome to CSU. Excited to have you here. Welcome to Fort Collins. Excited to have you in the community. Yeah, and I hope I get to meet you in person.
Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you,
thanks,
Lindsay.
y'all.
Thank you, Nancy. And thank you, everyone, for coming. We hope this was helpful. We will share this recording. So if there's anything you want to go back and reference, you can. Thank you, everyone.